Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk with me on this Tuesday afternoon. I am down in Destin, Florida, where we're going to be talking about SEC spring meetings. Had a chance to talk to Kirby Smart today. We're going to talk about what Kirby said, some of the other conversations that have been going on in Destin around spring meetings, Greg Sankey, some of the other coaches, what we've learned. We'll talk about some of the potential playoff models that are out there and what we prefer, what we sort of think of all the discussion around that. Going to talk about Georgia basketball. We had a chance to talk to Mike White on Tuesday, talk about a hire they made and the direction going forward for Georgia basketball, and then finish with Georgia baseball, which will be the number 7 seed in the NCAA Tournament, and they've got the Athens Regional getting underway this weekend. So no shortage of stuff to check out on this episode. I hope if you're watching this, you'll go subscribe to our YouTube and subscribe to the Junkyard Dawgcast podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Should be an action-packed episode, and let's get it going. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk with me on this Tuesday afternoon. If you are watching this on YouTube, you will see that I'm coming to you from a hotel in Destin, Florida. We have got the SEC spring meetings underway. The first full day of interviews and conversations and discussion pretty much wrapped up as we record this. We're recording this around 3 p.m. Central Time down here in Florida. So we're going to talk about what Kirby Smart had to share. A lot of really interesting thoughts and sort of the top topics for Coach Smart going into spring meetings. We'll talk about some of the other discussions, some of the other coaches, really primarily Greg Sankey, what he has said going into these meetings, as it is an absolutely wild time in college athletics. We'll talk about Georgia basketball. We had a chance to talk to Mike White earlier on Tuesday, got some good intel on this team, and then wrap things up with Georgia baseball, number 7 national seed, going in to the NCAA tournament, and they will have a chance to host the Athens Regional on Friday. But guys, let's start with the Kirby Smart part of the conversation. Kirby spoke to the media for about 15 minutes on Tuesday. A lot of good intel from Coach Smart, a lot of bigger picture conversation, which you would sort of expect this time of year. When you look at spring meetings, or the people who are watching or listening who aren't really familiar, a lot of the time spring meetings, the questions you get, the conversation are usually bigger picture compared to like media days, where media days is really, when Kirby Smart goes up there, it is Georgia focused. It is all about the Georgia Bulldogs, how they're looking, the certain positions of interest and what people want to know. Right now, the conversation is more so about the state of college football, the SEC, what they need to do going forward. And we're going to play some clips from what Kirby had to say. And I want to start with what I thought was the most interesting. Kirby was asked about the transfer portal before he had entered the room. Mike Elko from Texas A&M had been asked about the transfer portal. And, Mike Elko was really emphasizing we need just one portal window. He said, if you look at like the professional sports, there's only one free agency period. There's not different times where players can leave and players can look at other options, and that college athletics and specifically college football needs to have just one window. And so Kirby was asked about that, and Kirby was pretty fired up. This was a significantly longer answer than I think, honestly, most of us expected. Kirby went really in depth. That's what he had to say.
I didn't get to talk to Elko. I was getting ready to talk to him. I did talk to Clark Lee. I think of this meeting, and I think everybody in this room is 8 or 9, SEC championship or not, settlement. The biggest decision that has to be made in college football right now, by far, to me, is when is the portal window and is there one or two? Okay, that's not being decided by us today. A lot of people don't even know how it's getting decided, who's deciding it. But I need you to think for a second. There is a strong contingent We had an AFCA meeting. We had a meeting in which we unanimously decided that there really needed to be one portal window. Whatever that is what it is. And it needs to happen sometime in January. There is an outcry. There is schools. There's different conferences that feel like it should not fall during the play-in season. I would love that. I would love to be able to play the season without it. Is basketball able to do that? Or do they deal with the portal during their championship?
During the tournament.
During the tournament.
Yeah.
What do we deal with during the final, let's call it maybe 4 teams? I don't know if I'm exactly right on that, but roughly we're down to 4. We deal with that. Okay, that's because of the academic calendar for us, where the academic calendar falls. And everybody doesn't have that incongruency. Oh, by the way, we had to deal with that multiple times. It's not fun. It's not fun. It's really hard to be playing in a championship setting and having to deal with that. But when I brought that up as a complaint or a problem, it was told to me, there's no crying from the yacht. So if you're going to play in these environments, you have to be willing to do that. Now it's, we can't do that. And then I got told, well, we have a cap year. Cap year runs July 1 to June. If the portal is in January, we can't manage our cap. We can't do our cap. Well, that's an accounting method you got to take into account. Some schools are trying to manage that and prepare for that. Why can't you just change when the cap year is? Because the settlement is going to determine the cap year. And it's going to be based on all the other sports within our sports programs, which is July 1 to the end of June. So I'm a big believer in what Coach Elko said. And I want to develop my team. I think it's really important in football to have your team at whatever date in January, whatever we decide that is. And then you work those guys out, you train those guys, you lift, you prepare, you do meetings, you do all this preparation, and then that's your team, right? Like that's your team. And I'm great with the money they make. I'm great with them being able to go in the portal. And if you ask kids when they would like to be able to go in the portal, they're going to say in January so they can go get started where? At their new place. But there's a large contingency that's growing now trying to push in April, portal, maybe May. They want to practice in June, have some practices in June. I want you all to think about June for us. We have 10 days of high school camp in June. We believe in using those. Across the Southeast, we use 10 days. Some schools use 10, some don't use any. We also have official visits every weekend. So now we're going to practice our team in that same window. Something's going to suffer. Needless to say, I'm a proponent for a January, wherever it fits window. There's people saying, well, we can't get our kids in academically. Well, they're getting mid-year high school players in that same academic window. It's happening everywhere. So I'm a big believer in that, and I think that's the decision that has to be made, at least from a standpoint of SEC and bigger picture, the country. Where is the portal window, and is there 2 or is there 1?
I think you can tell just by the amount of detail that Kirby went into that this is something he really cares about and that this was something that was the front of his mind. And I would encourage the folks who are watching or listening to go to dogs247.com. I wrote a story about this with a little bit more detail because, I mean, there's a lot to break down from what Kirby said there. And I think a piece that I will mention on the podcast, the question was brought up later, not so much pushing back on Kirby, but just literally wanting to know who can set the portal windows. And he said, that's sort of up for debate, but that he looks to an implementation committee that is going to be created as a result of the House settlement. And I think there's 10 athletic directors on that committee. There's also compliance through the NCAA, some folks that are also involved there. That was who he looked to. But very clearly, this was something that mattered a lot to Kirby. And I think that much was obvious by the amount of arguments he made against his point and then broke them down, saying, well, people say, well, we can't get, transfers in January. Well, you get mid-year enrollees all the time. I mean, he kind of took it step by step, what he saw in some of the arguments against his case. But Ben, what did you make of what Kirby had to say here? And, very strongly wanting to adjust how the portal is handled. And, as Kirby said, he very clearly wants one portal window and to do it in January. What did you make of what Kirby had to say?
Well, a lot to unpack in that one, and also just a testament to Kirby Smart and all of the various details that he thinks of when it comes to these types of things, because I'll be honest, until I heard him say that, I hadn't even considered when you're talking about the transfer windows and you're talking about the cap years. And if you have a transfer portal window that's only in January, but then the cap year runs from July 1st to June 30th or whatever it is, like, how does that even work? And how ludicrous it is that that's like a thing that you might have to be thinking about. And like, again, he says, well, that's, an accounting thing that you have to figure out or whatever. I mean, that is not even something that I had even begun to think about. And clearly he's had detailed thought about how you would have to navigate through waters like that. I think he's obviously looking out for his own interests when he's talking about the portal window, right? Like, nobody wants there to be one portal window more than college football coaches. Like, they want one portal window more than anyone. But I think that when you talk to just about anyone, whether that be fans, coaches, scouts, like anybody that's out there, they would prefer there to be less movement going on and less opportunity for these guys to be switching teams over and over and over again. So I do think one portal window is the way to go. Is that possible? That's the thing that I get whenever there's debates going on about the way it should be or the way everybody wants it to be. It's like, I don't know what holds up in court. I don't know what ruling someone can make and who, to Kirby Smart's ruling or point, who makes that ruling. And then once that ruling is made, can one person just file a lawsuit and all of a sudden it ruins the entire plan that everybody has created for everyone else? Like, that's the world that we've kind of lived in for the last 5 years, is a lot of these issues have been dealt with in court. And because of that, they haven't held up. And because of that, it's changed the way that all of these rules can be applied. And so, yeah, I think everyone would prefer less portal windows. I think everyone logically says, let's have the portal window open up the week after the college football season's over, and then it doesn't open again, but everybody knows what their roster is for that year. But then, and I'm sort of doing what Kirby Smart did too. Then you start talking about all the layers of this that you have to think about. Like, okay, if a semester starts for certain schools in January and for others it starts in February or whatever that looks like, how does that come into play with all of this? And, it just becomes more and more complicated. And it, also hopefully this like shines a light on the farce of student athletics as it was over the last, however many decades, where it's like, all right, the fact that we're having to think of all of these things now and understand what obstacles you've got to jump through to avoid legal action being able to take place or whatever that might be. It was clearly broken. I don't know that it's fixed or that it will ever be fixed. But I will say I'm glad that there are people with voices like Kirby Smart in the room that think about these things and raise awareness. Are people that are making decisions listening to Kirby Smart, or do they think that he's just serving the interest of the University of Georgia? I have no idea. But I think when you listen to Nick Saban talk in the past, or you listen to Kirby Smart talk now, you hear people that care about the life of college football as a sport. And I think listening to them is important, even though I know it is a very popular, easy thing to do to say, oh, he's just saying what makes it easier for Georgia, or, whatever it might be. It's like he said, you can't make these comments from the yacht or whatever it was that he said. It's like, it's difficult because he realizes he's in a place where his voice is going to be just kind of kicked to the curb by a lot of people and say, he's saying it because of these reasons. And I just flat out don't believe that. Like, I think he is someone that wants the health of college football to be what he wants it to be. And I think that he thinks that it can be there, but there has to be some voice of reasons there. And unfortunately, I think oftentimes the voice of reason is the Nick Saban or the Kirby Smart of the world. Nobody wants to listen to them because they're Nick Saban and Kirby Smart.
Yeah, no crying from the yacht. I'm going to have to keep that one in my back pocket. Ben hit on a lot of the stuff that I wanted to say about Kirby talking about the portal. One thing, this was something he was talking about, and I'm going to we'll listen to a few other clips and I'll read some quotes. But when he was talking about the playoff, to a point Ben just made, Kirby talked about, something that he had learned is you're trying to constantly sustain the game and make the game better and setting your own self-interest to the side and saying, look, I'm not making a decision because this benefits my team. I have to think about the sport as a whole. And I think that adds to that point. And yeah, I mean, Ben, you hit on a big piece for me. It's like, man, us tying this to academics was such a dumb decision so very many years ago. Because as something as simple as, you look at schools that are on the quarter system versus schools that do semesters, like it just gets very complicated. And just the simple fact that, outside of semesters, you're run-of-the-mill college student can transfer, whenever they can, as long as, they've got the credits they have to have and all that sort of stuff. And so it's like kind of like constricting that gets complicated, and it makes it really difficult. And, I think to me, considering the summer part of that, where I thought him bringing up the camp dates and being like, we take advantage of these camp dates and trying to squeeze all that in June. I mean, I don't think that makes any sense, pushing that back. Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
Well, the one thing I will say on that, if I'm just going to push back on Kirby Smart a little bit, it's like if they have to change the calendar around for various things, they can just find another window for high school camps. Like, I know it's easy from a scheduling standpoint because kids are out of school and things like that during the summer. But if Georgia needs to have their 10 camps happen in December, or their 10 camps, I mean, December doesn't make sense, but their 10 camps to happen in March or April or whatever that looks like they can have it happen in that window and they'll make it work. So I will push back there. I realize if you just change the calendar now and then try and do things in June when you've got all these official visits happening and you've got summer camps, like, yeah, that's chaotic. If they adjust the calendar accordingly, they can kind of make it all work. But no, that's a whole nother conversation.
Kipp, what did you make of what Kirby had to say as far as the transfer portal window and just some of the points he made?
I mean, Kirby really has started to give much more elaborate answers to hypothetical situations, which is what we're all dealing with right now. Typically, he would just shut this stuff down, but every single thing that's being put, just out there as a potential change in college football is a hypothetical because we're, again, still waiting on a settlement, still waiting to see what legal ramifications come, not even sure who's able to make decisions on any of these subjects. So it's kind of funny to hear him talking about stuff that really there's no way of knowing what's actually going to happen. But who are we kidding here? Like, this sport has always been goofy. We used to have, we have bump rules where coaches in a contact period are only able to shake hands with high school players. Coaches can't tweet about players that they're recruiting. They're not able to talk about them until they're on campus. All these little hidden rules that have always existed. The fact that, the schedule was never made with the academic calendar in mind because they never expected the playoffs to actually go into January. I mean, we're going January 22nd, the last week of January when teams are still playing. The fact that Georgia's academics calendar lines up with it's 3 weeks before some of the other schools. You have schools that had a recruiting advantage over Georgia, like the quarter system you mentioned, because they didn't start their spring semester until like January 28th. So there's always things that I think are going to be goofy in this sport. So for the people who are saying what happened to the game I love, it's always been changing. And in the SEC, it used to be, the Southwestern Conference. Like everything's always changing in this sport. And talking about how you're trying to maintain the game that you love. It's been about money for a long time. So I think there's a lot of people hiding behind trying to protect the game when you have. I mean, we're going to talk about Greg Sankey. Obviously, it's financial. It's revenue-based. All of this is. And now that your players are receiving revenue, you're going to have competing forces here battling for rights and what you're able to do. So I don't think trying to guess at what this is going to look like is really going to, give us any more insight into what might actually happen. I think it's going to be a lot of back and forth, and I think we got dozens of changes left. As for what actually should happen, sure, one window makes sense. If you're doing it in January, you have less teams playing, so there's less chaos. but you're still going to have to give teams playing in the playoffs extra days. So you're still going to have multiple portal windows for teams that are still playing. So I don't think you're going to find a clean answer to this, but having one portal window is the cleanest answer and the one that provides the fewest issues for most parties involved. But good luck avoiding lawsuits.
Yeah, I don't know if there will be a clean way to do it, but I do think coming down to one portal window and trying to do that before spring football makes the most sense. Do we get there? I don't know. And if they do get there, there will be lawyers and there will be litigation, just because that's the nature of where things are right now. Kirby talked about quite a few other topics over the course of his 15 minutes at the podium. I would encourage y'all to go to Dogs 24/7. Wrote several stories about some of what I thought were sort of the more pressing things Kirby talked about. And I wanted to play another clip here. Kirby talking about conference championship weekend. There's been some discussion. I wouldn't necessarily call this a proposal, but some ideas out there about changing conference championship weekend. The thought in the last few years of the playoff has been, maybe you benefit by not playing in the SEC championship game. Maybe you're better off essentially getting a bye while the number 1 and the number 2 team in the conference duke it out in what is, 2 playoff caliber teams playing. There's been ideas of should we do semifinals and 4 teams play, or should the number 1 team essentially get a bye going into the playoff and the number 2 and the number 3 team play? That there's been a lot of different ideas. Kirby was asked about that, and this is what he had to say.
I don't know the formats they're talking about. A lot of this stuff I've heard about this team playing that team, crossing conferences within your conferences. I don't know. I know a lot of that's going to be determined by television revenue. What's best for that championship weekend? Is it a play-in game? Is it like your baseball, regional, your softball regionals, and you play and you try to get yourself in? I don't want to devalue the regular season. I do think there's a lot of value in the regular season. I don't think a team that, I guess Texas last year, right? They're the 1 seed going into the SEC championship. I mean, there's some scenarios out there. I'm like, okay, they got a play-in game. I don't know if I agree with that. They can play a championship game or they can play a game, but there should be some value to a regular season in terms of what you perform and what you do. You don't see a regular season basketball champion go in the SEC tournament play and then not make the tournament. I mean, it's not going to happen, right? So we have a little more limited spots than they do. But I enjoy the SEC championship. I'm a firm believer in that, but I'm going to support whatever conference we choose to do in that format.
I don't know how you guys feel about this. I am getting to the point with the conference championship weekend, as someone who's always loved it, and we've seen great games over the years, that I just don't know how you can keep the game as we've known it and it still be relevant and it still be worthwhile as far as having it in a playoff era like we are right now, the 12-team playoff. The thing I keep going back to on this conversation is that, we've basically seen college football become NFL-ified. I mean, the thing that I kind of took from the 2024 season, we're not going to see undefeated teams anymore. You're going to have teams that don't go undefeated, and you're also probably going to have multiple matchups with one team. And that's sort of how I see how we've kind of built this thing into an NFL-like model, albeit, at what's essentially now become a semi-pro level. I mean, going down from the NFL. But I think that it's intriguing to try to tweak with this. I think of the ideas that have been thrown out there, I think I really prefer the 2 versus 3, where you give that champion the game off, and that gives them a chance to get their bodies right before the playoff and allows them to rest up, even if that's not what we're used to seeing. I do think there should be a reward for coming out of the regular season as the champion, as Kirby really stressed. I think the biggest thing I would take from what Kirby said there was we can't devalue the regular season. I think that there needs to be a boost provided for that champion, even if that means they're watching conference championship weekend from the couch. I'll start with you on this one, Kipp. What do you think about Kirby's thoughts on conference championship weekend? And if there's any tweaks you think they should make or ideas you like, feel free to go ahead and share them.
This is where I actually agree that we are losing the identity of college football. It's harder to recognize the sport right now because I can't even imagine the SEC championship not having a major meeting. Like, it's the second most important really game and Georgia can possibly play in right now. And I get that there's, the quarterfinal, semifinal, sure. But if that game doesn't hold a lot of value in all the players' minds, and if Kirby's having to motivate his players to play in that game or think about sitting players out, which is something we were talking about a year ago, and it's just unfathomable, and then potentially not even having that game, it's just really unfortunate, but still possibly something that's unavoidable. I don't know. I think I look back to last year as far as devaluing the regular season. Georgia lost 2 games, and there are parts of the fan base that made it sound like, losing those games didn't matter. I can't imagine a Georgia Tech Georgia game that had more value than the one played last year, where Georgia knew if they lost that game, they were, on the cutting board for getting into the playoffs. And then still going into, all those overtimes, they knew they had to win that game. And then in Atlanta, the same thing. When you lose that game and you're potentially having to hope that the committee puts you into the playoff. Both those games mattered more than they've mattered in a long time for Georgia. And then just knowing that they came up just short the year before in a different playoff system, it's just both those things still had a ton of value for Georgia last year. So I kind of pushed back on the way the system is right now. I think the regular season matters a lot. We were talking about a bunch of teams later on in the season that we weren't before. And I think that we haven't given enough value to the conference championship. And I agree with you that something else should be placed, given to the winner of that game. Whatever we can do to protect that game and keep it still here is great for the sport.
Yeah, fascinated to see what they do. And it's a situation where, they're going to wait until the next playoff format is, determined for 2026. Based on what it sounds like behind the scenes, I think that's going to be a 16-team playoff. And we'll talk about the playoff format in a little bit. But, it's just fascinating what they could do with Conference Championship Weekend because as Kipp said, some of the great Georgia memories and moments has occurred on those weekends. And, to change it is definitely a shame, but I think that there's reason to evolve and to try to make it make sense for the teams that, in the bigger picture are trying to win a national championship and trying to make that weekend worthwhile for them. Ben, what did you think about what Kirby said on Conference Championship Weekend and just your own thoughts on what to do with it?
Well, I think this topic, there's a lot of discussion around a lot of topics, playoff format, automatic qualifiers, all these types of things. I think this is the one that I struggle with the most in all of college football right now. Like there's some people that get worked up about NIL or portal or whatever it is. The idea of a conference championship game, especially a Southeastern Conference championship game, or I would imagine how Big Ten folks feel about Big Ten championship games, these games should matter. And what I struggle with is I get it. Do some people feel they might be disadvantaged because they had to play in a conference championship game, or you lost a conference championship game and maybe it made your road in the college football playoff a little bit more difficult? Sure. Did playing for that SEC championship game not mean anything to you? I guarantee you when you talk to Trevor Etienne 20 years from now, he's going to think about winning the SEC championship game. That's going to have meant something to him. Did it change the trajectory of Georgia and Texas's season? No, it didn't. Did it affect seeding potentially a little bit? And maybe that even favored Texas in some respects, possibly so. But when the players on all of those teams are looking back on their college careers 20 years from now, every player that was on Georgia is going to feel incredible about the fact that they won an overtime SEC championship game. and everyone on Texas is going to regret that they weren't able to find a way to win it. And like, there's so much complaining about college football is not what it used to be. Everything's changed and whatever. It's like, that's the stuff that I think we as a college football population can still impact and say, we care about a conference championship game. We want the 1 versus the 2 to play each other and for it to mean something. And does it maybe have weird implications because we've now created a college football playoff world and all that matters is the national championship? Like, yeah, like, and I realize that's where this is all difficult, is because all that anyone really at their core cares about now is winning a national championship. Like, that's it. Nothing else really matters. They want to know what format it is going to be created so that they can win the national championship. They want to know what transfer rules or NIL rules are going to be in place so they can put together the best roster so that they can win a national championship. And to me, playing in Atlanta and winning an SEC championship game still matters a whole hell of a lot, regardless of any other results that come from that, regardless of how it affects the college football playoff, regardless of how that affects your chances of winning a national championship, anything. Winning that game in Atlanta should still matter. And I feel like Ohio State and Michigan should feel the same way about the game in Indianapolis. Like, every single team in the SEC should feel that same way about this. And I can't speak for the ACC and the Big 12, and I know conference realignment has adjusted the way certain teams feel about the meaning of some of those types of games. But in the SEC, that has not changed. Like, in the SEC, winning that game still matters as much, or arguably more, because it's as competitive as it's ever been. So I struggle with this one a lot because I do understand the way the world works and the way that everybody at their core thinks about the national championship. Yeah, playing an SEC championship game between your 1 and your 2 probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it should. And people should want to play in that game and they should want to win it. And I realize that we're probably not too long away from that not being a reality. Like, I can look at the world fairly and say what I want is irrelevant in all of this. There's going to be some change to the way conference championship weekend looks probably in the future, if there even is one at all. I would think that there still would be one just because of the amount of money for the conferences in those games, but I just don't know what that's going to look like. And I hope that someone could stand up, or as a society, we can just stand up and say, we still want college football games to matter. Everyone complains regular season games don't matter anymore. We don't want to devalue conference championships. Well, then let's just not let it. Let's just value them. If we value them, then they're not going to be devalued. But I understand that I'm looking at it probably through a, unrealistic way. It's just not the way the world works, and I get that.
But I will say, to your point, I think there will be some games in some form or fashion in conference championship weekend because of the money and because of, you look at the SEC specifically with the ties to Atlanta and the relationship with Mercedes-Benz Stadium. I think there will be games. I would just hope, the only thing I can think of, and it all depends on, how many teams are in the future playoff format, but like, can you tie a bye into one of those conference championship games? Like, you win and you automatically get a bye. Like, to me, if we want to keep it as a 1 versus 2, there's got to be some kind of reward that the winner gets other than, congratulations, you made the playoff and you also beat a playoff caliber team to do it.
At some point, don't you expect the SEC is just going to absorb the ACC, and we'll end up just having a, either standalone tournament, and then maybe the winner of that tournament plays the winner of the absorbed Big Ten tournament and national championship. I mean, they'll still get their playoff games, but I think the SEC right now is strong enough to where you could have a standalone conference and it still is the best sport that exists in the world. I mean, there's just you have to protect the regional rivalries at some point and still be able to make the revenue that all the athletic directors want, that ESPN is touting. The middle ground is basically that right now the SEC is as strong as it's ever been, but still can get stronger by getting those teams in the Southeast from the ACC and ultimately doing their own thing until it comes time to crown the national championship. So I think we're just in a transitional spot right now. That's where we're at right now, where no one knows what the finish line looks like. So everyone's worried that the sport is dying. But I still think in the end, this conference is going to become either one of two or one of one in the end. I don't see any other outcome, but it might be 5, 6, 8, 10 years away.
Some of the other things that Kirby Smart had to say on Tuesday, I found this funny. Ben kind of pushed back earlier when we were talking about the transfer portal. This was something I wanted to push back on. Kirby was talking about, you got to do what's best for the sport, not necessarily your own best, self-interest or talking in, as a member of the SEC. But he was talking about the playoff format. And he acknowledged, look, there's not going to be an answer that comes out of SEC spring meetings. Like, this is bigger than just the SEC, and there won't be a decision made this week. And he was talking about, the different sports you can look at and the way, like, say, baseball and softball and men's basketball use, like, RPI and strength of schedule. And then he said, quote, I have a hard time seeing Ole Miss, Alabama, and South Carolina not being the best teams last year. And that, for me, is a big part of the SEC. All right, like let's calm down, okay? Like, I get that Kirby wants to try to be nonpartisan and try to like toe the line. This does not need to just be an all SEC tournament, guys. Like South Carolina, South Carolina might be who I feel the worst for because they finished really strong. But like Ole Miss, don't lose to Florida. Alabama, don't get dominated by Oklahoma. Like, I don't know if y'all saw that quote, but that was the one where I was like, all right, Kirby, like, I know you're an SEC lifer. This is one I can't ride with you on. I feel like all three of those teams should have been in the playoff.
Well, and this kind of goes back to what I was, going on my rants about before. It's like, look, I get it. Are there maybe more good teams in the SEC than other places? But it's like, if we're creating this tournament that people are going to go play in, like, let's make the SEC matter. Right? It's like if you fight your way through the SEC and you get to a top 4 seed or you win the conference or however it ends up working out, it's like we don't need to be complaining about who finished 5th and 6th in the SEC being better than who finished 3rd and 4th in another conference. Like at that point, have some respect for who fought through the SEC and finished top 4. Like there's a reason those 4 teams powered their way to the SEC. Is it possible there are more teams than that are quote unquote top 12 or top 16 teams? Yes. No one's going to sit here and even deny that if certain teams went and played each other, they could win. But if we're getting to a point where we're doing automatic qualifiers or whatever, and you get 4 of them, it's like, can we just live with the fact that the 4 best teams in the SEC are deserving of representing the SEC, and that if one of those 4 teams can't go win the national championship, then your 5th and 6th best teams weren't that great either. Okay, like we can live in that reality, and this is not me being an SEC hater or me saying the SEC is not as good as things. It's like I think the SEC's teams are as good as everybody that talks about their teams being, and I do believe that Alabama and Ole Miss. We got to watch Ole Miss and Alabama ourselves and know how good of a team that those were. That doesn't mean that you just have some right to be in the playoff. And if you don't make it when you've got 4 automatic qualifiers, or in last year's case, there were 3 SEC teams that made it. All right, if you're not one of the 3 best teams in the SEC and you didn't make it, maybe you're better than some other teams. It's not that big of a deal. If you've got to be one of these top 3 or top 4 teams in the league for me to genuinely start to feel bad about you not making a tournament when, again, Miami might have had the best offense of the decade. We might look back at the end of the 2020s and say Miami had the best offense of the decade. They went 10-2, and they really weren't even in a conversation with Alabama and Ole Miss for that final spot, right? Like Miami was not even in the conversation when it was all said and done. They had a better record, a better offense than all of these teams. Now, were they the better team? I don't know. None of them got to play because all of them didn't do themselves enough to actually get into the tournament, and I think that that's fine. And also having a lot of people complaining about this, making the playoffs, as much as I hate the banter, is probably good for the sport.
The one thing I would say is to me, the argument about like Ole Miss and Alabama and South Carolina, we also talked about Kirby talking about let's not devalue the regular season. Well, what do you know? Like, lose it. South Carolina losing to a bad Kentucky team wound up mattering. Ole Miss losing late to Florida wound up mattering. Like, we're going to talk about the playoff format in a little bit, but like, I don't think there should be automatic qualifiers because it's like if there's 16 spots, the SEC is going to be well represented. It even goes to something that I'll also talk about that Greg Sankey talked about. Like, you know what I mean? Like, just win your games. And if we wanted to say, well, these teams were really good, why don't we determine the playoff format by loading up the college football video game, and whichever teams are the highest overall rating, they're the teams that are going to be in the playoff. To me, Ben, that just seems like the only fair way to do it.
I mean, I completely agree with you. And I think that Greg Sankey and obviously Kirby Smart was kind of towing the line a little bit, but we're still kind of touting like old SEC equity here. The SEC is still, again, arguably the best conference in college football, but you can't sit here and say that the transfer portal NIL hasn't created parity. So you can't just say having, a 500 conference record means that you're that much better than, again, a Miami team that went 10-2 because you're the SEC. And then also you just watched Vanderbilt beat Alabama. I mean, that was fun for the whole sport. Watching a team like Vanderbilt have a program like defining win over Alabama, but then at the same time, you're trying to get all of these teams into a playoff, and we're still debating whether Indiana lost to Notre Dame better or worse than Georgia lost to Notre Dame. I think we just have to acknowledge that parity exists now, and you can't just, bully your way into a playoff by saying, you're in the SEC. We just deserve this many teams before the season's even played, but also we want the regular season to matter. You just can't have it both ways. You have to acknowledge that your conference is going to lose games to each other and knock each other out of this playoff, and that's just going to happen. Your cream of the crop, it should still rise to the point to where you're able to be competitive in the playoff, and you're coming off your conference's poorest showing. You weren't competitive in this playoff structure. So everybody else gets a louder voice now, and you have to still fight for your teams, but you just got to acknowledge that college football's changed. There is more parity now. And you still, if you want your conference championship to matter and the regular season to matter, don't start fighting for your conference to get an abundance of teams in that arguably don't deserve to be in the college football playoff.
One more quote that I wanted to read from Kirby Smart on Tuesday. He was asked about basically how they're navigating roster limits, the aim for football to only have 105 roster spots going forward, but, the settlement not being approved as of the start of SEC spring meetings. Kirby said that they've been in communication with their players. I thought this was really interesting quote. I think the number one thing when you deal with that situation is when you don't know, you tell somebody you don't know, and you tell them which way it's leaning and what we're hearing, and you prepare for that. We not only don't know that, we don't know what the camp numbers are going to be. We don't know who's going to get to come back when school starts, who's going to get to come back when camp starts. A lot of unknown in that. Kirby talked about they had some players, some walk-ons who entered the transfer portal during the spring, who looked around and found which makes sense and something I hadn't considered. There's not that many options out there. And a lot of those guys decided to come back to Georgia basically to ride this thing out and to see what happens. We talked to Georgia Athletic Director Josh Brooks on Friday, and he talked like he expects the camp number and the roster by fall camp to still be over 105. Judge Claudia Wilkins, who is overseeing the House settlement, has said that, she wants those players to be grandfathered in to that 105 number, people who are already on the roster, to basically not just be shown the door abruptly because of the future roster limits. So, I thought that was really interesting from Kirby. Any thoughts from either of you guys about that 105 number and sort of the balancing act these teams have to take because we don't know exactly when the settlement's going to be approved?
Yeah, I think goes back to the fact that Kirby's having to manage so many different things. that cap day was kind of blew my mind as well as a Falcons fan, and wondering why Kirk Cousins is still on the Falcons roster right now. Thinking about college football having like post June 1st cuts is I can't even grasp that. So also thinking about the fact that these walk-ons are having to wait and see if they can even be on the team that they're practicing with every day, working out with every day. They better be flexible with these guys. And I mean, if they're not grandfathered in, you better give them their own portal window to be able to find a place, because I just can't imagine having guys that you're just going out there and having the off season that Georgia tries to have, where they push everyone to their limits. And then like August saying, all right, thanks for all your work, guys, but 80 you guys, you have to leave. So I just think that that aspect of it, college football needs to make sure that these guys are able to land on their feet, and preferably just land on the feet where they're at right now. Because they're already, I mean, the off season's already started for these guys. They're thinking this is where I'm going to be this fall. So to pull the rug out from under them, that would be just, completely. There would be no excuse for that. This would be fans should be upset. Everyone should be upset, and hopefully everyone should be lawyering up. But I think. Where we're at right now, it seems like for this year, they'll probably be able to stay where they're at. But how do you navigate those numbers at all? I mean, Georgia's welcoming in, they have their guys joining the class, the rest of their signing class and their walk-ons right now. But not knowing what the number actually is and where they're at on the roster just seems a bit different than, the previous off seasons where you had this scholarship number and you knew that everything would work out. You don't really know everything's going to work out whenever you just have this separate rule for non-scholarship walk-ons, especially when the SEC decides to basically self-punish and keep their roster at 85 scholarships when the rest of college football has the ability to have, up to 105. I think that part is kind of madness to me, and I don't really grasp that. So that's the one area where I do think Kirby Smart probably has a better viewpoint on it than anyone in college football.
Ben, any thoughts on just the 105 puzzle? And like Kirby said, basically they have to be honest with these guys and say, look, we don't know, we're just kind of figuring it out as we go.
Well, that's the hard part about it, is like the human element to like who might not have roles when all of this is going on, and what the date cutoff for that is and what that means for their futures and all those types of things. And to Kipp's point, like how do these college football coaches understand cap dates, try and figure out how many portal windows they need to be able to have, figure out what their roster size is going to be and what all that's going to happen. And they also have to implement offenses and defenses to rosters that are much less experienced than they have been in the past. And so it really is just a crazy world. I know we say that seemingly every episode that we talk about these big picture things. But with the 105, I mean, I defer to the college football coaches on this one, because like I don't totally understand what the impact of it is going to have on a day-to-day when it comes to how you want to practice, but also what it means to the lives of people that maybe aren't going to have spots. Like I can't sit here and pretend that I understand how certain, people are going to be affected by roster limits and what that's going to mean moving forward. And so, that's just one of those situations again, like people don't always want to say, oh, just let the football coaches figure it out. But like, there's a reason the football coaches are in the roles that they're in. It's because they understand the landscape a little bit better than people that are just helicoptering in and trying to make solutions for these things. So
take a quick break, come back, talk about what Greg Sankey said on Monday. We're going to talk about some of the playoff format discussion. We're going to talk about Georgia basketball, and we'll wrap things up with Georgia baseball. Kipp, one of the nice things about the way SEC spring meetings is set up is that Commissioner Greg Sankey starts off the action on Memorial Day. He had about a 45-minute press conference and sort of tackling a lot of different topics. Some of the bigger ones, and one that we will focus on, is the playoff format. Really interesting stuff. There's been a lot of discussion about the format and the playoff expanding to 16 teams. It's been a very popular format idea for the SEC and for the Big Ten to have 4 automatic qualifiers. Implementing automatic bids for the two biggest conferences and the 2 best conferences, and some of the other conferences getting the rest of the 8 seeds in that 16-team format. Greg Sankey came out and said that the SEC is not necessarily all on board with that format. He brought up, which I thought made a lot of sense, that there can be situations where the SEC could get more than those 4 teams, and that you don't necessarily want to tie yourself to just those 4 automatic qualifiers. Some of the other things that Greg Sankey talked about, you could tell there was real frustration with the ACC and with the Big 12 because of some of the back and forth about doing what's good for the game. And, you can tell there's tension with some of these other commissioners because they feel like the SEC is sort of overstepping their bounds right alongside the Big Ten. I thought that was the biggest thing to me, was Sankey trying to kind of make the point that he – I think he kind of sees himself as the fall guy in all of this. And that, to me, doesn't mean he's blameless, but that, he's trying to do what's best for the conference. And, I think we're at a point with college football, and we passed that point, really, when the Pac-12 was dismantled and the Big 12 took some big blows with Oklahoma and Texas leaving for the SEC, where, these conferences have sort of looked out for themselves. And now we're in this situation where they're trying to hold this sport together while we all sort of are watching and waiting to see if, as Kipp predicted earlier in this episode, where we just have 2 super conferences and 2 super leagues that basically dominate and determine who winds up winning the championship. I did want to talk about that playoff format. Again, seems like there has been momentum behind the scenes, especially with the Big Ten. The SEC, as I said, that Greg Sankey laid out, I think they're a little bit more lukewarm on it, not all the way on board with what they're calling the 4-4-2-2-1-3 model. 4 automatic bids for the SEC, 4 automatic bids for the Big Ten, 2 automatic bids for the Big 12, 2 automatic bids for the ACC, 1 group of 5, or whatever we're calling the lower group now, bid, automatic bid for whoever will be the highest rated, highest ranked of the group of 5 teams, and then 3 at-larges, which you would think if Notre Dame was good that year, they would get one of those 3, and there would be 2 open ones. I don't know where you are on this conversation, Kipp. I don't think that any league should have an automatic bid. I feel like this kind of goes back in to the conversation we were having before, where you need to respect how the season plays out, because there's going to be years that the SEC is really, really good, and there's going to be years where it's super top heavy, and to get 4 teams in that playoff is probably going to be a stretch. And I understand why Greg Sankey's pushing for it. As much as they want to say they're doing what's best for the sport, Greg Sankey gets paid to make sure that the SEC is taken care of. That's his job, and that should be his top priority, and that's his responsibility. But I'm not one that thinks that there should be any automatic qualifiers, that the 16 teams should fight it out, and that, we should just put it together like we have put together the 12-team playoff in its first year. And again, as we will see it this year. Do you have strong feelings as far as that automatic qualifier and if some of these conferences should be guaranteed a certain number of spots?
I understand why he's fighting for automatic qualifiers, and he's doing his job. He's been doing his job the entire time because he's loyal to the SEC, and trying to make sure that the revenue continues to come into its members, and that's where all the decisions are being made. The play-in idea is all about making sure you have fan bases still paying attention, and that's what they're battling right now because they don't recognize this game, they don't understand where it's going, and there's frustration involved because you had a lot of people in power who knew that players were going to be paid a long time ago and did absolutely nothing to prepare for it. Now it's about protecting the revenue. That's what they're doing. And it involves TV deals. It involves, being short-sighted over a long period of time leads us to where we're at right now. My personal opinion, I think playing games make sense. How you do that without a and so I don't know. If you're having 4 playing games, where's the SC championship game going on? I don't know that you're able to handle both of those. If you're having 2 playing games in a conference championship, now you really have to figure out what you're going to give the SC champion. Like what's the benefit going to be for the teams playing in that game? So I think there's a path to doing that. I just don't think we've figured out the format yet. At the same time, the future college football playoff format is also going to dictate whether or not they go to 9 conference games, whether or not ESPN's willing to pay them enough to add those 8 games, and then what happens to Georgia's non-conference schedule. Looking at it this year, it's not strong, right? Is it ever going to be strong again? Will Georgia even play Florida State in 2027 and 2028? I mean, Greg was also just talking about the fact that you had it was Nebraska, Tennessee being canceled, USC, Notre Dame on the brink, and so I'm looking at Georgia's future non-conference schedule. Are they even going to? I mean, that Clemson 29 and 2030 game. There's an Ohio State on the schedule down the road. That one just seems completely, there's no chance that one gets played. But those non-conference games were fun for Georgia. And Kirby Smart loved them. He loved being in the kickoff game every year. Is that even a viable option moving forward? I'm not sure. So I think, again, it is I can continue to hash out the past and the fact that this power game is all dictated on Greg Sankey doing his job and making sure his teams have enough revenue, but also knowing that this is the cost of that. If you're trying to make sure that all of your programs can afford to play players, it looks like now it's just coming at the cost of a lot of outstanding regular season games and possibly conference championships. So I think the facelift that the sport is undergoing right now could result in just a completely different sport in 2 to 3 years. So I don't know what the answer is, but they're in a mess right now, and they need somebody to come in and just make choices that actually help the game and continue the revenue stream.
The one defense that I will allow with the automatic qualifiers, I honestly believe if the SEC gets those automatic qualifiers, that we will see them take on a 9th conference game. I think that coupled with getting more money from ESPN, I think those are the 2 factors that will get you to the point that they would add that conference game. But I will say this was kind of pushing against that idea of adding another conference game. Something that Kirby said on Tuesday, he basically said, what do you think was better for the conference? Do you think that it was if we would have added another conference game or Georgia beating Clemson to start the season? And he was like, look, I think you really see the strength of a conference when they go and beat a marquee non-conference opponent. And just based on what Kirby had to say, I do think, he said that he felt like those games are good for the game. and that he wants to continue playing them. So again, that equation may change if they do pivot to 9 conference games and they decide that they don't necessarily need to play another conference game. But it is worth the discussion. But again, to me, if you're going to defend the automatic qualifiers, you have to give me a 9th conference game. You have to make it worth the fans' while, and it's something that I think I could get behind in that sense. Ben, what do you think about the talk about the SEC pushing for automatic bids in the college football playoff? Again, this is looking at probably a expansion of the playoff to 16 teams. Do you have strong feelings about automatic bids and what that would mean going forward?
I really don't have strong feelings about automatic bids. Like, I think that if there's 16 teams that are making the college football playoff and they're trying to take the top 16 teams, like 4 SEC teams are generally going to make the field. Like 4 Big Ten teams are generally going to make the field. Honestly, more than 4 SEC and Big Ten teams are probably generally going to make the field. So I don't find the automatic qualifier discussion to be, that compelling, because I don't think it's going to change the nature of the field that much. It might have a tweak here or there, whatever. But I also get why, if you're a commissioner of one of those 2 conferences, why you are feeling a little bit differently about how important having automatic qualifiers is. But I just think it's going to work out. If you're a top 4 team in either of those 2 conferences for the next 20 years, you're going to be in a pretty good spot when it comes to making the college football playoff. So I don't think you really have to worry about that too much. That's kind of my stance on it.
Yeah, fascinating to see the discussion these next few days. As we're recording this in about an hour, we'll hear from Greg Sankey again, and I'll share on Dogs 24/7 some of what Greg Sankey says, some of the questions he gets, and sort of his approach after a busy Tuesday down in Destin. Georgia men's basketball minute. We had a chance to talk to Mike White on Tuesday for about 15 minutes as they get ready for the 2025-26 season. Really interesting stuff. It was announced on Tuesday that Todd Abernathy is joining the Georgia staff. He has come over from Florida Atlantic. Mike pointed out he's known him since he was 18 years old. He was a guard at Ole Miss when Mike White was an Ole Miss assistant. Really raved about the connections that Todd Abernathy has when it comes to international players, and that Mike White really wants to take advantage of that in recruiting. Really spoke highly of his offensive prowess. Todd Abernathy's father played at Indiana and was on that undefeated Indiana team back in the day. So the guy has had a lot of success, was at Florida Atlantic when they made that Final Four run a few years ago. So big hire there. Some of the other stuff Mike White shared, looking at the rebuild they made this offseason with the roster, he really harped on the fact that he thinks that Georgia got better in terms of 3-point shooting and assist-to-turnover ratio. I think you're going to see Georgia play a little bit more smaller, see 4 guards out there at times, and really take advantage of what they've done as far as adding more shooters, because I think that was something we harped on this past season, was the fact that sometimes you just didn't know where those buckets were coming from. And I think that Georgia did their best to address that. Elsewhere, I thought it was really interesting talking about Jacob Wilkins, who signed with Georgia, Dominique Wilkins' son. Mike White said, when I was a kid, I wore number 22 because I couldn't pick between Michael Jordan and Dominique Wilkins. And he said, that he told Dominique about that while they were recruiting Jacob. Seems like he's really excited about that addition. I think that, as Mike White sort of laid out, that they feel like Georgia's got some momentum and that they did their best to take advantage of that NCAA tournament bid. Going to have some stories on Mike and this Georgia basketball team on Wednesday and through the rest of the week, because Mike gave us some really good stuff. But I think if you're a Georgia fan, you should be encouraged not only by that hire adding Todd Abernathy, but just the state of the program, the excitement. I do think that Mike feels good about this group they've put together, and that they are eager to get to work. They get back to work, he said, next week as they get ready for the season. So the summer workouts and activities are going to get started soon. And I think it's going to be a fascinating group because there's a lot of talent. They've just got to try to take advantage of it. Any thoughts from either of you guys on the direction of Georgia basketball's off season and just where they are as they get ready for workouts to start back?
Well, really, my only thought, Jordan, is, and I won't tell people where I ran into him, but I ran into Mike White last week, and all he wanted to say was Jordan Hill covers the Georgia basketball. I might be embellishing a little bit, but he covers the Georgia basketball program better. And this is the God's honest truth. This is a real conversation that I had, saying that Jordan covers the Georgia basketball program better than anyone. So subscribe to Dog 24/7 for Jordan's coverage on Georgia basketball.
Ben, if you'll check your Venmo, you've got $20.
I wouldn't be relaying. I would not be relaying a story that makes you look good if it didn't actually happen.
Fair enough. Before we turn over to Georgia baseball, this was something I want to bring up earlier. If you're watching this on YouTube, you see that I'm pulling up the new College Football 26 cover. The deluxe edition has Kirby Smart and Harry Dog on there. They kind of could have done them a little better. It seems like they sort of squeezed them in there. But, Ben, what do you think about Georgia getting a little representation on this cover?
Well, I really like the concept for this cover, and I liked the concept for the primary cover that had Ryan Williams and Jeremiah Smith. I don't know if they were doing it intentionally. Like, it's almost the sophomore season of the new iteration of college football. And also they're kind of the sensational sophomores in college football. I don't know if that was on purpose or not, but I love it if it was. But yeah, looking at this one, you're right. They kind of did Kirby and Harry Dog a little dirty, squeezing him over onto the side here. But, they're on the deluxe edition cover, and I think that tells you the fact that Georgia has two pieces of representation on the deluxe college football edition cover tells you where Georgia's at in the sport right now.
Kipp, any thoughts on the cover?
Are you able to coach as Kirby Smart yet? Because not being able to be the coaches last year felt like a huge drop in the ball. They can't afford coaches and players, so he's on the cover. But then again, James Franklin's on the cover too. What's James Franklin done to be on the cover here? I mean,
he made the Final Four last year. He made the Final Four.
Okay, great. I mean, and then if we're really getting into it here, I mean, the fact that you got Dillingham on there as well. I mean, they really did Kirby Smart dirty. We have a back-to-back national championship winning coach. It's just barely in there. Like, they're half of them's not even on the cover. It's a very Where's Waldo cover to begin with, but it shouldn't have taken me that long to find Kirby Smart on the cover if there are coaches on the cover. I mean, Tebow's there. It just feels like it was the first 50 people that responded got to be there kind of a thing. So sure, he's on there. And if, I don't know. I just think that the selections just feel like it was randomized versus your placement is based on what you've done in the college football playoff era. But hey, it's a cover. It's cool. Let's see if they've made some fixes to the game, because they had to make a lot of them last year. Let's see how it looks on day one. But being able to play as Kirby Smart in this game would make him being on the cover, hit a little bit more home.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, I do think that the coaches will be in this year's game. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but if I'm remembering correctly, that is the plan. And the only other thing I'll shout out, I do like that they got the Washington State flag on there, some college game day kind of feel with that on the cover. All right, we're going to turn it over to Olivia Sayer to talk about Georgia baseball. A very big weekend for Georgia, finding out that they would be hosting a regional. They're the number 7 seed. They are getting ready for a big weekend. That Athens Regional, Georgia, Binghamton, Oklahoma State, and Duke. Let's turn it over to Olivia to talk about Georgia baseball and share some of her thoughts as the Bulldogs get ready for the postseason.
You all had an incredible start to your week and a great Memorial Day. In case you missed it, the NCAA's Field of 64 was released today for the 2025 baseball tournament, which means Georgia found out who it's going to host in the NCAA Athens Regional. And the 3 teams that will come to Athens are Binghamton, Oklahoma State, and Duke. So Georgia will face Binghamton on Friday at noon. The Bulldogs did request the night slot, which will now be Oklahoma State and Duke, but the NCAA and the TV networks had the final say. Georgia will play on SEC Network at noon, and like I just mentioned, Duke and Oklahoma State at 6 p.m. on ESPNU. So Georgia did earn one of the top 8 national seeds, meaning that should it advance out of the NCAA Athens Regional, it would host the winner of the Oxford Regional. And that's a pretty challenging regional, a pretty fun one. It's number 10 Ole Miss, Georgia Tech, Murray State, and then Western Kentucky. So definitely a lot of fun potential matchups there when you look at Ole Miss, Georgia, Georgia Tech, Georgia. A lot of cool storylines within those, but first Georgia has to make it out of the NCAA Athens Regional. So as far as the Athens Regional, the team that I believe poses the biggest threat to Georgia is Duke, and that is because the Blue Devils have some left-handers. We all know left-handers have not exactly been Georgia's forte this season in terms of offense. I have the numbers right here in front of me. Against lefties, Georgia is batting .257, which is below league average of .279. Against righties, Georgia's hitting .300, which is above the league average of .287. So definitely a big split there, and Duke has a bunch of left-handers. So if Georgia ends up matching up with it, it's probably going to see a lefty on the mound to start the game. That being said, I do think Georgia's offense is going to be a lot better in Foley Field. It has all season, whether it's the short right porch, just the confines of the ballpark. It's genuinely a more hitter-friendly ballpark, unlike some that we've seen like Hoover, Omaha, stuff of that nature. Foley Field is definitely hitter-friendly, but it's a bit of a double-sided coin as to where, yes, that helps Georgia. It could also help Duke a little bit, and although Duke is not the most power-hitting team, it is 14th in the NCAA with 99 home runs, so almost at 100, which means we could definitely see the ball fly out of Foley Field this weekend if that ends up being a matchup, and it should be a fun one. But as far as the rest of the field, Oklahoma State doesn't exactly stand out on paper as one of the scariest teams, but it ended the season super hot. It actually won 11 of its last 14 regular season games, and it has some really solid pitchers, a bunch of guys with ERAs under 3, including one that's made 20 appearances, 16 appearances, and another 20 appearance has a 3.43, couple around 3, couple around 4, so definitely some guys on the mound. It's not exactly the best offensive team. I believe it's a team batting average around .252, 80-something home runs, so not exactly a lot of firepower there, but definitely has a pitching staff that can compete with Georgia, and in my opinion, Oklahoma State is probably going into this tournament with nothing to lose. It was one of the final 4 teams into the field, so it's kind of just going in there with a let's get an upset mentality, and it definitely has the guys to do it. So Binghamton, who Georgia will play on Friday at noon, is actually built on its offense, whereas the other teams such as Oklahoma State and Duke are more built on its pitching staff. And looking at the Binghamton lineup, they have 5 guys batting over 300 with a couple other on the border, plethora of guys with OPSs over 100, some solid slugging percentages, a bunch of 380, 400 on base percentages. So definitely a really solid lineup. I do think just on paper, Georgia's definitely the more overpowering team. But like I've said before, it's the game of baseball. Anybody can win on any given day. So as far as who is going to be opposing this lineup for Georgia, I asked Wes Johnson about this today because there's always that debate with host teams of do you start your ace in game 1 or do you sort of save him for later, have him in your back pocket, throw a good starter game 1, but not your ace, since in case you get into a do-or-die situation, you'll have him there. And I asked Wes Johnson about this today, and he mentioned that Georgia is in a very unique position because he truly believes the Bulldogs have 2 aces in Leighton Finley and Brian Curley. Both have been really good as of late, especially Finley, who had a bit of a rough start to the season, but's been really consistent recently, and then Curley's gone, I believe, 5 innings in all of his starts this season. So definitely a good 1-2 punch for Georgia there. As far as who we will see in game 1, I'm going to guess it's whoever's going to have that best matchup on paper because this team is so analytically driven, so matchup oriented. So I think if there's one who the analytics are just screaming that he projects better against this lineup, I think that's who you'll see. And I would honestly love to see JT Quinn in this starting rotation. I believe he's earned it. He started Georgia's SEC tournament game, had a couple really solid outings before that, is actually second on the team with a 2.25 ERA, has 43 strikeouts and 32 innings with just 15 walks. So if Georgia needs that other starter and it really wants to keep Colton Smith in the bullpen, as say a starter goes short, say they just need someone in a shutdown situation, bring in Colton Smith. He's stretched out, he can cover innings. I think he's a great option from that bullpen. If that's the case, you might see a guy like JT Quinn make a start. You might see a guy like Nate Taylor get an increased role, who's actually first on the team in ERA, a freshman from Buford High School. So it's going to be really interesting to see what Georgia does with its pitching staff. And that's one of the biggest differences from this team as compared to last year's team. Last year, it kind of just ran out of pitching bullpen-wise. The bullpen was taxed. It was relying on the same guys down the stretch. And that just kind of caught up with them at the end against NC State in the Super Regional. That's not really the case for Georgia this year. Yes, it's a little low on starters, but it has a bunch of guys in the bullpen that can step up. It has some guys who are stretched out who can deliver that length. So it should be a bunch of fun matchups as far as analytical-wise, as far as matchup-wise, and I'm excited to see how Georgia plays it.
Georgia versus Binghamton, 12 p.m. Eastern time on Friday. Olivia Sayer will have the coverage for us at Dogs 24/7. Super excited to follow along that Athens Regional. I did want to shout out, too, from a couple of weekends ago. We haven't done a Junkyard Dawgcast episode since then. Shout out Georgia women's tennis. Won the national title. Very impressive performance against Texas A&M. Won the outdoor title after winning the indoor championship back earlier this spring. All right, we're getting ready to wrap up this episode. Before we do, I'm going to throw it back to Ben. We're getting ready to do another Stay Woke episode this week. What should the folks be looking out for, and what can they expect?
Yeah, we'll have an episode on Thursday. We are going to be talking about the big official visit weekend that's coming up this upcoming weekend. And like I said on our last episode, we're going to be doing these every single week throughout the summer. We've been doing every other week, but it's just we're at the time of year where every week makes more sense. You know, we'll have guests at times throughout the summer, probably not on Thursday because we just are going to want to preview everything that we're looking ahead to with the summer, both official visits this upcoming weekend and also maybe the most important summer camp of the summer on Sunday as well.
We're going to wrap up the episode right there. I appreciate Kipp and Ben for popping on with me. Thanks everyone who watched this live, everyone who is watching or listening to it after the fact. Go to dogs247.com. We are going to have a lot of content from down here in Destin. Probably have some more updates to our SEC media, our SEC spring meetings thread. Like I had mentioned earlier, Greg Sankey is speaking this evening, and we'll have a chance to go sit in there and see what he has to say. But go check us out on YouTube. Subscribe to the Junkyard Dawgcast wherever you get your podcasts. Please rate, review, subscribe. Let us know what you think. Give us 5 stars. We want to get that out there. And when you do that, when you rate and subscribe, it helps us out so very much. Subscribe to the YouTube Dogs 24/7 and also subscribe to the TikTok Dogs 24/7 as well. So we will end the episode right there. For Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.